What did I say wrong in those recordings? I didn't even see the recording. All I know is I did nothing wrong.
I'm very excited that I've had the opportunity to represent Delaware, and I hope with the support of the voters that I will get the opportunity to serve in the United States Senate as one of 100.
We're going to continue to have that check, meaning other players have a role here. Secretaries of state, election administration officials, even state governors, state courts.
I'm Nicole Killian in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. It's a big night on the 2024 campaign trail. President Biden is fundraising just outside of Washington, and former President Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis held dueling speeches in New Hampshire. The former president spoke to voters the day after audio was obtained by CNN and CBS News, in which he discussed a, quote, highly confidential document in a meeting at his Bedminster Golf Club in July 2021. The recording was cited by special counsel Jack Smith in the indictment of Trump in the classified documents investigation. In his speech to voters today, Trump didn't address the recording, but he did comment on it to Fox News.
What did I say wrong in those recordings? I didn't even see the recording. All I know is I did nothing wrong.
For more on this, Ed O'Keefe and Aaron Navarro join us now. Ed is a CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Aaron is a CBS News political reporter. And Aaron, I want to start with you. I know the former president seemed to play down these recordings, but let's take a listen to what he actually said on tape back in 2021 when he appeared to be discussing these sensitive documents related to Iran.
Let's see.
Yeah.
I just found, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Except it is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. Look at this.
Of course, before his comments today, he had previously said that he was discussing newspaper and magazine stories. Does this recording contradict that? And could this be damaging for him politically?
Well, politically in the short term, it seems to help him. We've seen in poll after things like these reports drop, he gets a spike. You know, his base gets really animated. But long term, what I'm watching for is there voter fatigue? I've seen this in bits and pieces on the trail. People saying not so much the merits of these cases, but that they think the legal problems Trump has will make him less electable in the general election. Does that voter fatigue continue to grow as more of these cases, including Georgia, which could see some action in the summer, as those kind of pile on for former President Trump?
I know on the flip side, too, being on Capitol Hill, we also are watching for potential lawmaker fatigue. As you know, there's kind of been a clear divide, especially among Republicans, those who back the former president and those who have been more vocal against him. But I want to play some sound from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who was asked about the former president's viability in this 2024 race. Let's watch.
The question is he the strongest to win the election? I don't know that answer, but can anybody beat Biden? Yeah, anybody can beat Biden. Can Biden beat other people? Yes, Biden can beat him.
Now, McCarthy, up until now, has been a pretty loyal defender of the former president. Is this a sign that he may be on the fence? Does he have a point here?
Well, when you ask Trump's biggest challenger, former Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and you point out the gap between him and Trump in the polls, he points to these swing state polls where he may either tie with President Biden or beat President Biden while Trump is losing. And that is kind of the general election argument that McCarthy is alluding to, and many Republicans in general are kind of worried about when it comes to Trump. And is DeSantis, the clear option? It seems that answer is wavering a bit, but that seems to be the question for the rest of the field.
And Ed, President Biden has tried to steer clear of the former president, but another former commander-in-chief was at the White House today, former President Barack Obama. Why was he there?
Nicole, we asked, and they said this is just part of a regular get-together by the two guys who have seen each other a few times this year, but they hadn't had a formal lunch like this in quite a while. Remember, former President Obama still lives here in Washington, keeps in touch with the current president, his former running mate and vice president, but also has been known in recent weeks to have spent time with other Democrats further down the ballot, maybe members of the House and the Senate especially, talking about the future of the party, the future of democracy, and politics in general. So it's likely that the former president conveyed some of those observations and things he's learned to the current president, who is gearing up for a heftier campaign and fundraising schedule in the weeks to come. beginning with a big speech he gives tomorrow in Chicago on the economy. One of the big issues that the White House concedes is a bit of a weakness for the president, at least in recent polling.
And Aaron, turning back to you, former President Trump also was campaigning in New Hampshire today, where he addressed a prominent women's group. You also had Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who happened to be there and was holding a competing event. So let's take a listen to what both of them said on the trail.
Now we are approaching the most important battle of our lives. I believe this is the most important election we've ever had, maybe by far. I used to say that in 2016 and meant it. This is more important right now because our country is going to hell.
I think the idea of draining the swamp, in some respects, I think it misses it a little bit. Because we didn't drain it. It's worse today than it's ever been, by far. And that's a sad testament to the state affairs of our country. But even if you're successful at draining it, the next guy can just refill it. So I want to break the swamp. That's really what we need to do.
So it seems like the Florida governor trying to take a little bit of a dig at the former president. But in terms of their joint appearances, I mean, was this all just a coincidence here?
Well, I would point out Nikki Haley as an event to Vivek Ramaswamy. It's just that season now for New Hampshire. But it is notable. I mean, this women's group in New Hampshire put out a statement when DeSantis announced his town hall today, kind of condemning him for holding it as the same day as their big event. You had two people from that group resign, saying that, it was kind of pushed by the Trump team to put out that statement. But it's no secret that DeSantis is trying to be a bit more combative with Trump. I've noticed in the past couple of days, DeSantis has kind of said, this Trump that we have now is kind of a copy of 2016 when he was campaigning. And if you look at what he did in his administration, he came short on a couple of things like the southern border wall. So DeSantis kind of making the case that he's the one to complete some of Trump's, ambitious policies.
And turning back to you, as you were mentioning, the president will be in Chicago tomorrow to talk about the economy and what the White House is dubbing Bidenomics. I mean, explain what that is and what the president's trying to accomplish here. I mean, is he trying to take a page out of Ronald Reagan's playbook?
Well, maybe in terms of a moniker, but not in terms of economic theory. Remember, the White House and then candidate Biden has, now President Biden has talked about building the economy from the middle class up, not from the bottom down, which was the hallmark of Reaganomics, or at least the way it's been described in the years since. The idea, though, is to get the Democratic Party to rally around the economic work that the White House has done, much like Republicans rallied around Ronald Reagan economic theory for so long over the course of the last several decades. This is a speech in Chicago. They will tack on some fundraising to it. But the main goal of the speech is to start boosting the president's numbers when the question is asked, how do you think he's handling the economy? Because while his overall approval rating sits in the 40s, which is not great, but this White House at least would say it's fine for now because it's the odd-numbered year, not the even-numbered year when we're going to be on the ballot. On issues like the economy, he's mired in the 30s, which is just too low, and it suggests a soft support even among Democrats and independent voters, especially that they're going to need, obviously, to turn out next year in the general election. So the hope is to sort of begin to once again, and they've done this a few times this year with clearly not much success, remind people about the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, all the work on semiconductor manufacturing across the country, and say these things are being done now, or you're going to start seeing more of it in your communities across the country. You're going to see people getting employed because of the work that's going on around this. That's all because of what we've done. We're boosting the economy in the process. You should be more favorable in what we've been able to accomplish. We'll see if it works. And they say it's part of a weeks-long push throughout the rest of the summer to try to draw more attention to it and basically get Americans to give the president more credit for what's been done.
And very briefly, what about the vice president? What can we expect to see in terms of her getting out on the trail more? And also talk about her poll numbers because, she seems to be underwater in some areas.
That's one way of putting it, Nicole. Yes, she hit the lowest approval rating of a vice president, at least in this century, in an NBC News survey this week. Look, vice presidents, as you know, not always, the most essential part of the ticket, but it's clear that she's become a drag on the president's overall numbers and on Democratic Party enthusiasm going into next year. So we know she is, and she has done in the last few weeks and will continue to do, a lot of fundraising for the campaign, which is a big part of what gets done in the odd-numbered year. Continues to focus, as she did over the weekend, on issues like women's and abortion rights, likely will be deployed if there are contrary decisions to the administration's view on affirmative action or the student loan forgiveness program later this week, and is somebody that they're going to continue to deploy in strategic ways to sort of shore up the base, meet with the constituencies within the party that are going to be most needed. She was in New York yesterday for a fundraiser, but also stopped at the Stonewall Inn there in Greenwich Village to celebrate gay rights. Those kinds of events to hopefully and ultimately boost her numbers.
All right, Ed O'Keefe and Aaron Navarro, we thank you so much. The Democratic-controlled Senate Homeland Security Committee is accusing federal agencies of downplaying warnings about violence on January 6th. A new report from the majority's members found that both the FBI and Department of Homeland Security failed to heed warnings of the attack online. In the findings, they noted tips officials received about now convicted members of the far-right groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. The report also claimed that the agencies engaged in finger-pointing after the fact, blaming the event on Capitol Police and other intelligence officials. Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester became the first black woman to represent the state of Delaware in 2016. Now she's hoping to make history in the U.S. Senate. She'll join us next. You're streaming America Decides.
It's been the greatest honor of my life to represent Delaware, to protect our seniors, our environment, our small businesses, and women's reproductive rights. I'm running to represent Delaware in the United States Senate.
Welcome back to America Decides. Delaware has never elected a black woman to the U.S. Senate. The state's lone member of the House is looking to change that. I spoke with Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester today and began by asking her about what that would mean to her.
Well, first of all, I have to say, a lot of students, you probably know my story that even when I decided to run for Congress, I had never run for anything in my life. I had just been widowed the year before I decided to run, and I was over 50, all of those things that people say, oh, you can't do it. And I think that this moment, the fact that I'm running, the fact that there are other Black women who are running, the fact that, we have historic candidates that are stepping up at all levels, not just in the Senate, really, I hope inspires others to just do their part, whatever that is, whether it's running or running a campaign or contributing. My best friend, she said, I don't have money to give you, but I can make you pots of spaghetti and beef stew. And that's what she did for me. So I think this moment is a special one. To me personally, it is not lost on me that there are currently no Black women in the Senate. And so to be able to represent is important. And also, and probably more equally as important to me, is representing my state. That is important to me as well. So people ask, what does it feel like to make history? And I think for many of us, we're not thinking about making history. We're thinking about doing the work. We're thinking about making a positive difference in people's lives. And that's really what I think about when I'm doing this work is how can I make things better? And then also, how can I represent well?
And this week, Delaware State Senator Sarah McBride announced that she is going to run for Congress. In fact, your House seat. Do you support her candidacy?
Well, again, Sarah also represents, a person who would be breaking barriers should she win. She's qualified.
I mean, what do you see? What do you think that says about Delaware? The fact that you could potentially have the first openly transgender member of Congress if she's elected. And as we've discussed, your potential Senate bid could make history as well. What do you think that says about your state?
Well, it's funny, when people asked me the first time I ran and won and became the first woman and the first person of color to represent Delaware, I was like, I was only one vote. It is the people of Delaware that really have made these decisions and that have stepped up. And some people just think of Delaware as a blue state, but we are only 3 counties, and we're blue, we're purple, we're red, we're coastal, urban, suburban, and rural. And so we really are a microcosm of the country. And I think what it represents is back to that theme of bright hope, that all of us can be included in our democracy. That's what I think it represents. You know, and right now, Sarah is the first one to come out of the gate for this position, but there are some other great folks, candidates potentially that might step up as well, who have, said that they're interested. And so, again, I just think it's representative.
So just to be clear, you're not making an endorsement just yet.
Oh, no, not just yet. I have to say, fortunately, in Delaware, we're small. And so I've actually either run with, encouraged to run, or served with many of the other folks that are talking about running as well. But I do know that Sarah is incredible, and we'll see what comes along in the next 490 whatever days there are to the election.
I know you're very close to Senator Tom Carper, who is retiring. You worked with him when he was governor, when he was a congressman. I know you're also very close to President Biden, who also served for more than 3 decades in the U.S. Senate. And so I'm curious if you consulted the president before making your decision.
Well, he has been just, first of all, such a great champion for this country. I remember when he decided to run for president, and we had a meeting, he and I, in his home, and he talked about his aspirations for the first vice president that was a woman. We talked about representation as well in the Senate. And the day before I announced, I actually got a call from him. He was just jumping on a helicopter, and it was an honor. It was an honor to hear from him. He has been so encouraging, and I'm really looking forward to running on a ticket with him together.
I know you also serve as the co-chair for his re-election campaign. We know the president is set to deliver a major speech tomorrow on the economy, on this concept of so-called Bidenomics. Is this a message that we will hear from him more on the campaign trail?
Yes. I mean, I first of all, like you said, we've all heard about Reaganomics, which was more top down or trickle down, and sometimes it just never even got down. And for him, and it comes from who he is and how he served, that his focus is on from the bottom up to the middle out, which will help everybody. It's a focus on Main Street, not just Wall Street. And we've seen in the past 2 years the impact of that.
I know you're excited about his candidacy, but our CBS News poll found recently that 42% of Democrats actually don't want the president to run for re-election. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can only respond based on what I see and what I hear. I mean, I know polls, we look at polls and they're a snapshot in time. But when I'm out on the campaign trail, when I'm talking to my colleagues, people really have seen the positive impact that his presidency has already had. And I love his theme, let's finish the job.
And lastly, I just want to get your thoughts on this decision that we just got from the Supreme Court, Moore versus Harper. I know you tweeted we must pass electoral reform in Congress. What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest areas for me, and one of the reasons why I am interested in serving Delaware in the Senate, is because our democracy, the very foundation, is on the line. And so when you look at our courts, who were held in such high esteem, there are now folks that feel, where are the ethics? And so this impacts these major decisions, whether it is voting rights decisions, whether it's, whether it's the reversing Dobbs, these things, the Senate is the place where we can have a major impact.
All right. Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, thank you so much for joining us here on America Decides.
Thank you.
The Supreme Court ruled in favor of voting rights advocates Tuesday in a major case out of North Carolina. CBS's Major Garrett will help break down what the court decision means after the break. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Supreme Court ruled today in a case involving the power of state legislatures. By a vote of 6-3, the High Court rejected a ruling that would have given legislatures more autonomy over federal elections and in drawing partisan congressional maps. It's one of a handful of significant cases the court is ruling on this week. For more, CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins us now. And Major, this is a pretty complicated ruling that deals with independent state legislature theory. Right. So break down what that is and what this decision means.
All right, let's imagine this. A state legislature says it's not bound by the ruling of the state's constitution, not the federal constitution, the state constitution, or the body in charge of enforcing that state's constitution, that state's Supreme Court. That is essentially what petitioners asked the Supreme Court to say. State legislatures are so powerful, and their powers can be exercised in all manner of election controversies, that no one in the state, not a governor, not a secretary of state, not a local election official, not the state Supreme Court, can have any role in determining whether they're acting or ruling in a way that's consistent with either that state constitution or the federal constitution. Nicole, to describe that as a radical interpretation of state legislative power is to be charitable. Don't trust me on that. That's what the Supreme Court said today. The conservative Supreme Court, by a 6-3, and it was actually 7-2 on the merits. The Supreme Court said this idea that state legislatures are so powerful doesn't exist. It's an invention, and we will not recognize it. That theory is now, for all purposes and time, dead.
And because this decision came from the conservative court, you have a lot of Democrats reacting. Former President Obama calling this a resounding rejection of the far-right theory. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer calling this ruling something that reaffirms the longstanding precedent that respects our constitutional system of checks and balances. I mean, do you think this came as a surprise to Democrats?
So I think that they were wondering what the court would do with this case because they wondered why the court took it on in the first place. And they were nervous. Hey, wait a minute. This is settled law, and the precedent is long established. It goes all the way back to James Madison, who, because the Constitution is written in a certain way about the Elections Clause, gave the Congress the authority to oversee what state legislatures were doing in this space. Why? Because James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and others were suspicious of the political motives of state legislatures. So Democrats are like, this is settled law. Supreme Court, why are you doing this? Oh, my gosh, are you doing this because you want to give this life? Actually, it didn't. It wanted to try to settle this matter so it doesn't come back, doesn't crop up in federal district courts or appellate courts or come back before the Supreme Court. And for the time being, this definitive ruling for the Supreme Court should guarantee, at least for the foreseeable future, this does not come back up in election controversies. And that's really important. Think about 2024. Let's just say this had been validated by the Supreme Court. A state legislature could say the Secretary of State has no power, governor has no power, county election officials have no power. We are going to declare who won this state and who carries the state's electoral votes. Can you imagine the chaos, uncertainty, and anxiety, to put it mildly, that would create? That's not going to happen now.
And, of course, this isn't the only big decision the court is ruling on this week. What else can we expect?
3 in Maine are regarded as important. There's a First Amendment case that also is involved in gay rights and the assertion thereof. There's also 2 very, very big cases, one on the future of affirmative action and college admissions, the other on the permissibility, legally speaking, of President Biden's student loan debt forgiveness program. On student loans, the administration has said this was carried out under a 2003 law that gives the Education Secretary wide authority to change repayment terms. And that's what Congress intended, and we're acting completely within the construct of that. The court heard very forceful arguments that no Congress ever gave this administration that kind of power, but affirmative action, student loans, those will be the big cases by the end of this week.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking to you more. Major Garrett, thank you so much for your expertise. And that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.